Season 5, Episode 31, Black History Moments, is a podcast dedicated to telling the stories of those who have been forgotten or who are lesser known in our history. But as you all know, we are in the midst of our HBCU history series, where we have been covering the founding of historically Black colleges and universities across the country. So far, we have covered FAMU, Lincoln University, Prairie View, Howard, NCAT, and Bethune-Cookman. And the reason I wanted to start this series is because historically Black colleges and universities have been a part of the lifeblood of the Black community for generations. And as someone who has attended one, I have such a strong appreciation for them. Now, coincidentally, a few weekends ago, I was invited to the premiere of Tuskegee 100, which is a series that will air on Amazon Prime this fall. The filmmaker behind the project is a graduate of Tuskegee, and the premiere showed the very first episode where we learned a bit about the history of Tuskegee University. And as I sat there, I thought, this is just perfect timing for the Black History Moments podcast. This is the story of Tuskegee University. Before we dive into the history, as a little backstory, when I was in middle school, our school took us on a field trip to Tuskegee. And one thing that I vividly remember during that trip was the emphasis on Booker T. Washington and how he was so heavily involved in the school's beginnings. However, one name that I don't remember hearing during that trip was the name of a formerly enslaved man named Lewis Adams. Before Booker T. Washington arrived in Alabama, there was someone there setting fuel to the fire that led to Tuskegee University becoming a reality. Lewis Adams, this formerly enslaved man, was married to Sarah Green, and when slavery was abolished, the two of them had dreams of opening a school for African Americans in the area so that they can have a basic education. Now, see, at this time, Lewis had never been formally educated, but he could still read, write, and it said that he spoke very well. But in order for the school to be successful, Lewis and his wife Sarah knew that they needed teachers. And it's a no-brainer to think, right? In order to open a school, you need teachers, but that was a problem within itself because there weren't enough qualified teachers in the area. So they knew that in order to educate the African American population there, they first needed to find a way to educate them to become teachers. One day, Lewis is approached by a man by the name of W.F. Foster, who was up for re-election in the Alabama Senate. And just like politicians today, not much has changed. He sought out those of the most influence in the community. So he approaches Lewis, who has influence and sway amongst the Black population in Alabama, and he asks him, hey, in exchange for your support, what can I do? See, Lewis was a deacon at a local church, and he was also heavily involved with teaching others vocational skills in the area. So he was well known, and he was also trusted amongst the African American population. W.F. Foster, who was up for re-election, he knew this. So when it was time to figure out a way for him to win the support of Black people in the area, Lewis Adams told Foster that in exchange for the Black vote, he wanted a school for his people. Not money, not land, not livestock, not 40 acres and a mule. Lewis wanted the guarantee that if he was going to secure these votes for W.F. Foster, there has to be a school that is going to open for Black people. Now, I found this extremely honorable because even today, I know that if that conversation occurred, it probably would not go down like that. Instead of asking for something that would benefit the whole and the future of the community, a lot of people today would probably ask for stocks. They would probably ask for money, some sort of contract guarantees, you name it. But that's a conversation for another day. Lewis, at this time, asked for a school, and Foster says, you know what? I can do that. Once Foster was reelected, he kept his promise to Lewis, and he and Arthur L. Brooks, who was a colleague in the House of Representatives, passed the legislation for the establishment of a Negro normal school in Tuskegee. According to Tuskegee's site, quote, a $2,000 appropriation for teacher salaries was authorized by the legislation. Lewis Adams, Thomas Dreyer, and M.B. Swanson formed the Board of Commissioners to get the school organized. There was no land, no buildings, no teachers, only the state legislation authorizing the school. George W. Campbell, who was a former slave owner, subsequently replaced Dreyer as a commissioner. And it was Campbell, through his nephew, who sent word to Hampton Institute in Virginia looking for a teacher. This is Hampton, the Hampton, right? Booker T. Washington got the nod, and he made the Lewis Adams dream happen. He was principal of the school from its founding date on July 4th, 1881, until his death in 1915, end quote. And this is why I mentioned earlier that while I was on that school field trip in middle school, we didn't hear much about the backstory of the school's founding. It was like it all began with Booker T. Washington. So I felt it was important to give you all some context of how we arrived at Booker T. Washington coming down to Tuskegee. Now, not to take anything away from him, though, because when he arrived in Alabama, there was much to do. The $2,000 that was allocated to the school was only for salaries, so there was no money in the budget for infrastructure. No buildings, no land, nothing. Bethel Chapel AME Zion Church, where I believe Lewis Adams and his wife were members, donated a room to the church to serve as an instructional space, or in this case, a classroom. And it was in that room that 30 adult students would meet and have classes, the very first classes of Tuskegee University. From the Encyclopedia of Alabama, quote, shortly thereafter, the university purchased a 100-acre abandoned plantation near its original site, which still functions as the central part of the campus today. Washington used his talents and his local and political connections to help the university ascend to national prominence. That rise was not without controversy, however. Under Washington's guidance, Tuskegee took a leadership role in the developing industrial education movement. In 1883, he hired English and social sciences teacher Adela Hunt Logan, who would go on to become a leader in the suffrage movement and the school's first librarian. He also became an outspoken advocate for the movement at a time when there was a national debate among Black intellectuals about the pros and cons of industrial versus liberal education. And his most vocal opponent was W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a staunch supporter of liberal arts education. Washington's persuasiveness won the support of many white philanthropic organizations that were integral in the creation of Black colleges, end quote. Booker T. Washington was so great at fundraising that 11 years after the school was founded, just 11 years, and while Booker T. Washington was in charge, the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute was granted authority to act independently of the state of Alabama. In other words, it became a private entity but still retained its status as a state land-grant college. Quote, in 1893, the state increased Tuskegee's annual appropriation to $3,000, and the Slater Fund, which was a philanthropic organization, donated $1,000 for the development of an industrial education program. By this time, the school had grown to 600 students and 38 faculty members and had acquired an additional 1,300 acres of land, resulting in a 1,400-acre campus. The site included 20 buildings, and they had livestock, equipment, and property totaling $180,000. Tuskegee's faculty were at the forefront of developing curriculum for the industrial education movement. As Tuskegee grew in size and also in importance, so did the faculty, which attracted future luminaries like George Washington Carver. Now, George Washington Carver, who we are all, I'm sure, very familiar with. He arrived at Tuskegee in 1896 and he came over to chair the agriculture department. Now, this department and Carver himself would gain fame for many groundbreaking advances in the field of agriculture. This included the introduction of crop rotation to Alabama's rural farmers, and Carver was also the guiding force behind the development of Tuskegee's movable school and a supporter of its facilitator, Thomas Monroe Campbell, who was the first Black extension agent in the United States. End quote. Booker T. Washington passed in 1915. And I was curious to know what caused his death, so I found a notice from back then, and I'm going to read you a little bit of it. Booker T. Washington, foremost teacher and leader of the Negro race, died early today at his home here near the Tuskegee Institute, which he founded and of which he was president. Hardening of the arteries following a nervous breakdown caused his death 4 hours after Dr. Washington arrived from New York. Although he had been in failing health for several months, the Negro leader's condition became serious only last week while he was in the East. He then realized the end was near, but was determined to make the last long trip south. He said often, "I was born in the South, I have lived all of my life in the South, and expect to die and be buried in the South." End quote. Accompanied by his wife, his secretary, and a physician, Dr. Washington left New York for Tuskegee at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon. He reached home last midnight and died at 4:40 o'clock this morning. End quote. And I found this notice important to include because, for one, I'm from the South. And I completely understand his sentiments, but also I wanted to include it because often when we think about people like Booker T. Washington and Mary McLeod Bethune and also W.E.B. Du Bois and the likes, it is so easy to think of them as these entities instead of people. At the end of the day, they were people, human beings just like you and I, who were performing small acts consistently. And these small acts help shape the world that we live in today. And that's important to note because it's so easy to feel like we are so small and that there isn't much that we can do to effect change, but it is very much so possible. To me, this podcast is my small act. It's my hope that maybe one day someone listening to these stories will go out and do something tomorrow, this year, next year, or years from now that helps make the world a better place somehow. So, let's get back to our story. After his passing, a man by the name of Robert R. Moton became the next president of the school. Robert was a former administrator at Hampton University, which is the same school that Booker came down from. And under his leadership, quote, the Tuskegee Veterans Administration Hospital was created on land that was donated by the Institute. The Tuskegee VA Hospital opened in 1923 and was the first and only staffed by Black professionals. Administrator Bess Bolden Walcott and fellow members of the Tuskegee Women's Club founded the first all-Black Red Cross chapter at the institution, and she would later become instrumental in earning the organization a National Historic Landmark designation. Although this was a great accomplishment, there was something happening at colleges across America. Going back to our encyclopedia article, quote, after Washington's death, the industrial education model at Black colleges lost a significant amount of its momentum. At the time of Booker T. Washington's death, HBCUs had produced a thriving middle class that sought greater control over the curriculum of Black colleges. This is what was considered the new middle class, and they were largely comprised of educators who recognized the value of a liberal arts education. This is important because this is one of the issues that Black people started having amongst each other at this time. If you remember from the last episode on the history of Bethune-Cookman University, you may remember how we discussed the separation and how it was believed that Black people should be learning. On one hand, you had those who believed that industrial education as the way. So, learning about farming, learning about housekeeping, and other specific trades. But then on the opposing side, and on the other hand, you had Black people that believed that we should be educated on the liberal arts, so social sciences, culture, and more broad ideas. Personally, I don't think that there was any one right way to go about it. I think if they were able to meet in the middle and decide that it was okay to have both, maybe we would have an entirely different system now. But I digress. Quote, in 1935, Frederick D. Patterson, doctor of veterinary medicine and professor in Tuskegee's Department of Agriculture, became the institute's third president and served until 1953. Under his leadership, Tuskegee established the School of Veterinary Medicine, the only such program of its kind at a Black college. To date, approximately 75% of all African American vets in the United States were educated at Tuskegee. I'm going to say that again. Today, approximately 75% of all Black vets, African American vets in the U.S. were educated at Tuskegee University. Dr. Patterson also founded the United Negro College Fund, and this has provided more than $1 billion in tuition assistance to students attending private HBCUs. Patterson envisioned the United Negro College Fund after realizing that the fundraising capabilities of private colleges were stymied following World War II. He believed that those schools could be more effective in raising funds collectively rather than individually soliciting prospective donors and philanthropic organizations. 26 other Black college presidents joined in his efforts. Not unlike Washington, Booker T. Washington, that is, Dr. Patterson's visionary ideas were not without controversy. In November 1940, the War Department established a program to train Black pilots for the U.S. Army Air Corps. Tuskegee was chosen as a training site for these pilots, given the Institute's existing course in aviation and its pre-existing airfield, today named Moulton Field in honor of the university's second president. Tuskegee was once criticized. Activists working to end racial segregation in the military opposed the creation of the separate military training facilities. Nevertheless, Tuskegee moved forward with the training, and graduates of the program served with distinction in World War II. The pilots, now known as the Tuskegee Airmen, were highly decorated for their service in the war and were critical forebearers of the civil rights movement. End quote. And I will do an episode on the Tuskegee Airmen in the future because that has been a story I've been so excited to tell you all. So more to come on that later. Quote, in 1953, Luther H. Foster, who had previously served as the university's business manager, succeeded Patterson. He became the fourth president, and Foster led the institute through the most turbulent periods in U.S. history, the civil rights era of the 1950s and 1960s. Throughout his tenure and with his full support, students and professors alike were active in boycotts and court battles over Black civil and voting rights. Tragically, Tuskegee student and voting rights activist Samuel Young Jr. was killed while attempting to use a whites-only restroom in 1966. Samuel Young was studying political science at Tuskegee, and he was also a Navy veteran. While he was trying to desegregate restrooms in Macon County, he was shot and killed at a gas station by 68-year-old Marvin Segrest. Marvin told Samuel that instead of using the restroom, he had to go around the back of the building. An argument ensues, and Marvin shot Samuel in the head, killing him. Samuel was 21 years old. Marvin was found not guilty by an all-white jury after 71 minutes of deliberation. That same year, 1966, Tuskegee became the first Black college designated as a registered National Historic Landmark, and 19 years later, Tuskegee attained university status. There is no denying that Tuskegee University has had a deep and running history of making something out of nothing. And with their rich history that they carry, I know that Lewis Adams, the man that had been formerly enslaved, would be so proud of the pride of the swift growing South. With 8 colleges and schools, from veterinary medicine to engineering and architecture and construction sciences, Tuskegee offers both undergraduate and graduate degrees in varying fields, continuing to carry on the legacy of those who began in that one room donated by a church with 30 students. That brings us to the end of this episode. I hope that you share it with someone that you know, whether it be a coworker, a friend, your auntie them, your cousin them, or even a graduate of an HBCU. I hope that you remember that you too are Black history. And I will see you in the next one.